Get ready for your iPhone to cost more money, my American friends.
When Donald Trump told Apple CEO Tim Cook to stop building in India, it wasn't just boardroom drama, it was a shot fired at the heart of global trade.
I had a little problem with Tim Cook yesterday. I said to him, Tim, you're my friend, I treated you very good. You're coming in with $500 billion, but now I hear you're building all over India.
Apple's big move to India was meant to ease its dependence on China. But for Trump, it crossed a red line and he decided to impose punishing tariffs on iPhones assembled outside of the U.S.
When they build their plant here, there's no tariff. So they're going to be building plants here. But I had an understanding with Tim that he wouldn't be doing this. He said he's going to India to build plants. I said, that's okay to go to India, but you're not going to sell into here without tariffs.
Now a tech giant and a former president are on a collision course where political pressure meets business reality. At stake, not just iPhones, but the entire future of how and where the world's biggest companies build. And if things go south, your next upgrade might cost you more than your insurance. So can Apple move production home without moving the price out of reach? Apple spent over a decade perfecting a supply chain masterpiece in China. Factory after factory, city after city. The scale was unmatched, the labor costs were low, and the logistics were nearly flawless. If you owned an iPhone, chances are it was born in Shenzhen. But that blueprint started fraying with shifting geopolitical winds. As U.S.-China relations took a nosedive, that perfect setup began to crack. Tariffs climbed as high as 55% on Chinese-made electronics during the Trump administration, and while some were later relaxed, the message was clear: single-country dependence was a liability. Rising labor costs, strict COVID-era lockdowns, and growing political friction only made matters worse. So Apple began looking elsewhere, and all signs pointed to India. Soon after, India became an emerging hero in Apple's playbook. Between 2024 and March 2025, Apple assembled a jaw-dropping $22 billion worth of iPhones in India, 1/5 of its total global output. And by March-May 2025, Foxconn had shipped over $3.2 billion worth of iPhones from India to the U.S. in just 3 months, with 97% of those exports heading directly to American consumers. Analysts expect India to account for 25–30% of global iPhone shipments this year. But why India? That's because India offered something China couldn't: lower trade barriers and rising political favor. Indian-made iPhones faced only a 10% duty upon U.S. entry, nudging Apple to scale operations more aggressively. Combine that with India's enabled PLI incentives and Foxconn's state-of-the-art plants in Chennai and Bengaluru, and the math is compelling. On the other hand, Chinese-made phones faced a crushing 55% tariff, proving that single-country dependence was a liability. Fun fact, as Apple's supply chain diversified, India began to emerge as a major player, with discussions on tech forums highlighting how it might be surpassing China in importance. Today, India has become Apple's primary focus. But just as Apple's India move was gaining serious momentum, it ran headfirst into something far tougher than trade logistics: American politics. Apple's swift expansion in India, both in scale and speed, caught President Donald Trump's attention pretty fast. And when Trump went after Apple, he made sure everyone heard it, loud and clear. In a campaign-style appearance in May 2025, Donald Trump didn't mince words. Recalling a conversation with Apple CEO Tim Cook, he said,
I said, Tim, look, we've treated you really good. We put up with all the plants that you built in China for years. Now you got to build us. We're not interested in you building in India. India can take care of themselves. They're doing very well. We want you to build here, and they're going to be upping their production in the United States. Apple.
It wasn't a polite request. It was a demand. A warning shot fired in broad daylight aimed squarely at Apple's global manufacturing plans. Soon after, Trump announced a 25% tariff on any iPhones sold in the U.S. that weren't assembled in the U.S., explicitly including the phones from Apple's operations in India. Such a policy sent shockwaves across Apple's headquarters. Production was no longer just about efficiency, but about politics. Analysts said shifting manufacturing entirely to the U.S. could add hundreds of dollars to the price of each phone, possibly even doubling the base price. And even the most loyal iPhone buyers might flinch at a $1,500 price tag for a base model.
Hypothetically, let's say the tariffs go into place and Apple has to figure out a way to make all of its products here in the United States. We're hearing 3 to 5 times the cost of a typical iPhone, for example.
Trump's demand might sound simple: build iPhones in America. And on the surface, it feels like a patriotic move until you realize your next upgrade could cost more than your rent. Apple's ambition to transplant iPhone production to the U.S. runs smack into two hard realities: skyrocketing costs and logistical hurdles. First, the price. Wedbush analyst Dan Ives estimates U.S. manufactured iPhones would cost around $3,500, more than 3 times the current base price of about $1,200. That figure doesn't even account for Trump's proposed 25% tariff on non-U.S. phones. That alone could tack on $300, $500 per device. In other words, your loyal upgrade may end up costing as much as a car down payment. Then comes the time. Setting up U.S. factories capable of iPhone scale output isn't a weekend project. Experts say it may take 5-10 years to replicate Apple's mature China-based infrastructure, even with virtually unlimited funding.
In the U.S., this would take, if money was no object, it would take closer to 5 years to build and to set up. So it'd be really, really difficult, and that's if money was no object.
Take Foxconn's Wisconsin project, for example. Announced in 2017 as a $10 billion LCD plant with 13,000 jobs promised under Trump's 8th Wonder banner. By 2021, Foxconn slashed it to a data center with just 1,500 jobs, less than 10% of expectations. The American cost of labor, land, and permitting made the original plan collapse. Building a U.S. iPhone plant means more than assembly lines. It demands a whole ecosystem: specialized robotics, local component suppliers, and skilled technicians. TSMC's Arizona chip fab, even with advanced tech and $12 billion invested, won't be fully operational until 2025-2027, and costs run 4 or 5 times higher than in Taiwan. And it's not just Apple facing this. Other tech companies have made similar decisions, but with a different destination. Google, Samsung, Nokia, and Intel have all moved large parts of their production out of China, not to the U.S., but to Vietnam, making it the core of the China Plus One strategy for tech giants. Samsung now builds over 60% of its smartphones in Vietnam and has invested $1.8 billion in OLED facilities. Google reopened an old Nokia plant to make Pixel phones. Even Nokia and Intel have moved operations there. But even that shift wasn't effortless. Vietnam is still 15-20 years behind China's full supply chain, and local firms warn U.S. tariffs could undercut growth. For context, Vietnam's labor costs are roughly half of China's, averaging around US $3 per hour versus China's about $6.50. If Vietnam, with lower wages, regulatory ease, and rising technical infrastructure, is this difficult, imagine the challenges in the U.S. The timeline, costs, and risk multiply dramatically. Consumers would feel the impact. A $3,500 iPhone priced out of many Americans will drive them to alternatives or older models. Apple would lose its strong position, especially in cost-sensitive markets. In short, reshoring is more than expensive. It's a logistical puzzle of epic proportions. Even with patriotism on its side, Apple would face decades of rebuilding infrastructure, retraining workers, and reassembling a dismantled supply chain. Meanwhile, anyone hoping for an affordable made-in-USA iPhone may end up waiting and paying a long time, and President Trump's "build here or else" message is not fixated on Apple alone. Walmart has reportedly been warned not to raise prices despite cost increases from tariffs. Tesla, once celebrated for its U.S.-based factories, now faces scrutiny for expanding abroad. And NVIDIA, the star of the AI boom, pledged a staggering $500 billion in U.S. infrastructure investments, a move widely seen as a response to political pressure. This is more like ideological enforcement than economic strategy. Trump is reshaping where and how the tech world builds, one public statement and threat at a time. But the problems are enormous and nearly impossible to handle. Even if Apple manages to relocate its manufacturing facilities and somehow overcomes the cost issues, the challenges don't end there. That's because Apple's supply chain is a finely tuned global network pulling in components from across Asia, semiconductors from Taiwan, rare earth minerals from Southeast Asia, screens from Japan and South Korea, and countless precision parts from China. No single country, not even the US, has all the pieces in place. Rebuilding that network domestically would require years of investment, regulatory approvals, and workforce training. Even if Apple set up final assembly lines in the U.S., the core components would still need to be imported, making Made in America an even more unachievable slogan. Meanwhile, for India, Apple has become more than just another investor. It's a national milestone. India has positioned Apple as a centerpiece of its industrial ambitions, not just another investor. Between March and May 2025, Foxconn's shipments of Indian-made iPhones to the U.S. reached $3.20 billion, a deliberate move to circumvent tariffs on Chinese imports. And with this momentum, India is expected to produce 25–30% of the world's iPhones in 2025. To fuel this surge, New Delhi took decisive action. Import duties on battery covers, camera modules, and other components were reduced from 15% to 10%, and PCBA parts now enter duty-free. Customs and infrastructure at Chennai's ports were also optimized. Foxconn and Tata Electronics now benefit from expedited processing and priority logistics. If Apple were to pull back now, the repercussions would go beyond production numbers. A retreat would undermine the momentum of Make in India, shaking investor confidence and weakening trade initiatives that rely on Apple's involvement. The political cost would be steep, with national pride and economic strategy in jeopardy. That's precisely why India is accelerating support for Apple. For them, this gamble isn't academic, it's strategic positioning on the global chessboard. But if Trump gets his way and production shifts to the U.S., it's not just the supply chain that will feel the strain. Millions of U.S. consumers will pay the price. Roughly 155 million Americans use an iPhone, making up 56–59% of the U.S. smartphone market. These devices aren't just fancy gadgets, they're essential tools for phone calls, emails, maps, health tracking, remote learning, and contactless payments. In 2024 alone, Apple shipped 151 million iPhones worldwide, with U.S. demand remaining strong as customers prize the combination of performance and affordability. And it's not just phones. Apple's MacBooks and iPads have become staples in American classrooms, with a new back-to-school discount program in 2025 making these devices more accessible than ever. Nearly two-thirds of college students use Macs, citing durability and security as key reasons, proof that Apple Gear isn't a novelty, it's a necessity. Currently, base iPhone models start at about $1,200. But under Trump's proposed 25% tariffs and the skyrocketing cost of U.S. manufacturing, those sleek rectangles could get a serious price hike. Analysts estimate that producing an iPhone entirely in the U.S. would push the base model past $1,500, with high-end versions creeping higher than $2,300. And it won't stop with Apple. According to S&P Global, tariffs on foreign-made electronics could impact nearly half of all U.S. PC buyers and the majority of smartphone users. That means laptops, tablets, and even accessories could become significantly more expensive. For the average American family, it's a budget disruptor. It could delay student tech upgrades, force consumers to buy older models, and widen the digital divide for lower-income households. In fact, a Wallet Hub survey found that 63% of people in 2024 avoided upgrading their phones due to high costs, and Gen Z has already turned to used iPhones in increasing numbers. A policy designed to boost domestic production could end up squeezing millions of American consumers instead, making them reconsider what they buy, how they buy it, or whether they buy at all. Apple now stands at a crossroads. Give in to Trump's demands or hold its ground and face steep tariffs that could seriously cut into its profits. If it folds to Trump's demands and shifts production to the U.S., it risks losing the efficiency, speed, and cost control that made the iPhone a global icon. But if it doesn't, It could get slammed with heavy import taxes that shrink profits and jack up prices for consumers. There's no easy way out. It's a lose-lose puzzle. Every move comes with a cost, and whichever path Apple picks, it'll echo across boardrooms worldwide. Because this isn't just about Apple, it's a sign of something much bigger. The clash between Trump and Tim Cook is part of a growing global tug-of-war: open markets versus political control. For decades, companies built a world without borders, tech giants thriving on interconnected supply chains, global markets, and cross-border innovation. But that perfect model has now started to crack. Governments everywhere are asking the same question: how much control should they have over industries they see as vital? The outcome of this clash would determine whether countries choose to build walls around their economies or find smarter ways to work together across borders. Apple's next move could quietly rewrite the rules of global trade. A single decision could shift how global trade works, how governments draw the line between politics and business, and how much everyday people end up paying. What happens next won't just decide where iPhones are built, it could shape how the global economy works for years to come. So what are your thoughts on this? What would you do if your next iPhone costs twice as much? And should any government get to decide where a global company builds its products? Let us know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more explosive breakdowns and news. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.